There is an animal alive today that watched the dinosaurs die. Not a descendant, not a relative. The same body plan, the same hunting strategy, the same cold, unblinking eye above the waterline. Crocodilians, the group that includes every crocodile, alligator, caiman, and gharial on Earth, have been on this planet in their modern form for roughly 95 million years, and their broader lineage stretches back more than 200 million. They were here before flowering plants were common. They were here before grass existed as a widespread ground cover. They were here before your entire mammalian order was anything more than a shrew-sized creature hiding under a fern, waiting for the giants to stop shaking the ground. Think about what that number actually means. 200 million years. Say it slowly. In that span of time, the Earth has endured 5 mass extinction events, the kind of catastrophes that erase the majority of all species on the planet, in what geologists call a blink. Not a slow decline, a blink. The first was the end Ordovician extinction, roughly 445 million years ago. That one predates the crocodile lineage, but it sets the pattern for what the planet is capable of doing to its own inhabitants. The second, the late Devonian, killed off roughly 75% of all species on Earth. The third, the end Permian, about 252 million years ago, is the one scientists call the Great Dying. It eliminated an estimated 96% of marine species and 70% of land vertebrates. 96%. If you had been standing on the shore of a Permian ocean and could somehow see every living thing in the water, and then you came back a geological moment later, 96 out of every 100 would be gone forever. That extinction came closer to sterilizing this planet than anything before or since. The crocodile lineage emerged shortly after, in the aftermath. Then came the end Triassic extinction, about 201 million years ago, which took out roughly half of all species and cleared the ecological stage for the dinosaurs to dominate. The crocodile ancestors walked through that one too. And then the end Cretaceous extinction, 66 million years ago. The asteroid, the one everyone knows, the one that ended the reign of the dinosaurs. That impact and its aftermath wiped out roughly 75% of all species on Earth, including every non-avian dinosaur that had ever lived. Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops, Velociraptor, every one of them gone in a geological instant. The crocodile watched from the water. Consider what that survival required. The end Cretaceous impact ejected enough dust and sulfur into the atmosphere to block sunlight for months, maybe years. Global temperatures crashed, photosynthesis collapsed. Food chains failed from the bottom up. The animals that survived were, almost without exception, small, cold-blooded, capable of long periods without food, and able to shelter in water or underground. The crocodile lineage checked every box: slow metabolism, willingness to eat almost anything, including carrion, ability to go a year or more between meals if necessary, a hunting strategy that requires almost no energy expenditure. Lie still, wait, strike, done. When the world burned, the crocodile did what it always does. It waited, and then it kept going. The Paleocene, the Eocene, the Oligocene, the Miocene, the Pliocene, the Pleistocene, the Holocene. Every geological epoch since the dinosaurs died, the crocodile has been present. Ice ages came and went. Continents drifted. The Mediterranean dried up and refilled. Grasslands replaced forests. Whales returned to the sea. Primates evolved, developed opposable thumbs, invented fire, agriculture, writing, cities, industry, and the internal combustion engine. Through all of it, every single one of those transformations, the crocodile has been sitting in more or less the same river, doing more or less the same job, with more or less the same body it had when it watched the sky turn black at the end of the Cretaceous. Look at the numbers. A modern saltwater crocodile has roughly 66 teeth, arranged in a jaw that can close with a bite force measured at approximately 3,700 pounds per square inch. To put that in perspective, a lion's bite comes in at roughly 1,000 psi, a great white shark around 4,000. A human about 160. The saltwater crocodile's bite is the strongest ever directly measured in a living animal. When those jaws close on a wildebeest or a water buffalo, The animal is not killed by the bite in the way you might imagine. It is killed because the bite does not release. The crocodile does not need to chew. It only needs to hold on, roll, and drown. That death roll, the rotational technique that tears prey apart underwater, is not a learned behavior. It is not passed down. It is not culture. It is instinct, written into the nervous system of a lineage that has been practicing it for tens of millions of years. Every hatchling crocodile, cracking out of its egg weighing less than a stick of butter, already knows how to do it. The blueprint has been perfected for so long that natural selection essentially stopped editing it. There is nothing left to improve. And this is the animal we decided to eliminate. Between roughly the year 1940 and 1970, the global crocodile and alligator trade skinned an estimated 5 to 7 million animals. 5 to 7 million for handbags, for boots, for watch bands and wallet interiors, and briefcase corners. In some populations, the removal was so complete that field surveys in the 1960s and 70s could not locate a single breeding adult across river systems that had held tens of thousands only a generation earlier. The American alligator was pushed to the edge of extinction. The Nile crocodile crashed across most of its historical range. The saltwater crocodile was hunted down through Southeast Asia and northern Australia. The gharial, the long-snouted fish-eating crocodilian of the Indian subcontinent, was reduced from perhaps 10,000 animals in the 1940s to fewer than 200 breeding adults by the mid-2000s. That is a crash of somewhere between 96 and 98%. In 60 years, we came closer to killing off the gharial than the asteroid came to killing off its ancestors. Here is what is strange. For an animal that survived the end Permian, the end Triassic, the end Cretaceous, and every ice age in between, for a lineage so evolutionarily successful that it functions less like a species and more like a geological constant, we have spent the last 100 years trying, systematically and enthusiastically, to erase it. Not because it threatens us in any meaningful modern sense. Crocodiles kill people, yes. The global human death toll from crocodilian attacks is estimated at somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 people per year, mostly along a handful of African and Asian rivers where subsistence communities cannot avoid daily contact with the water. That number is real, and it should not be minimized. But it is not why we hunted them to the edge. We hunted them for their skins. Walk down to the edge of any large tropical river at the end of the dry season, and you will find something that most people never think about. Death. Not violent death, the ordinary kind. A wildebeest that didn't make the crossing. A hippo that died of old age in the shallows. A catfish belly up in the reeds. A zebra foal that drank from the wrong pool. In a functioning river system, this material does not stay there for long. It disappears, usually within hours, sometimes within minutes. And the primary reason it disappears is the animal we've been talking about. The crocodile is, among other things, the most efficient large carcass disposal system on Earth. To understand why that matters, you have to understand what a rotting body does to fresh water. A single adult wildebeest carcass, left to decompose in a river shallow, will release somewhere between 40 and 60 kilograms of nitrogen-rich organic material into the water column over the course of a week. That material feeds bacterial blooms. The bacterial blooms consume the dissolved oxygen. The oxygen crash suffocates fish and invertebrates for hundreds of meters downstream, and the pathogens released by the decomposing tissue, anthrax spores, botulinum toxin, clostridium, salmonella, and dozens of others, enter the water supply that every other animal in the ecosystem, including humans, is drinking from. This is not theoretical. In the year 2004, an anthrax outbreak along the Luangwa River in Zambia killed more than 100 hippos in a matter of weeks. The bacteria did not stop with the hippos. Anthrax spores can survive in soil and sediment for 80 years or longer, waiting to reinfect any animal that comes into contact with them. In 2011, a similar outbreak in Uganda's Queen Elizabeth National Park killed lions, buffalo, and hippos, and it was traced back to carcasses that had entered the water system and were not removed quickly enough. The crocodile is the animal that removes them, and it does so with a digestive system that is, frankly, Alarming. The stomach acid of an adult saltwater or Nile crocodile has been measured at a pH below 1.5, more acidic than the acid in a car battery. It is strong enough to dissolve bone. It is strong enough to break down hooves, horns, turtle shells, and the keratin plates of another crocodile. More importantly for our purposes, it is strong enough to destroy anthrax spores, botulinum toxin, and the vast majority of the pathogens that would otherwise persist in a rotting carcass. When a crocodile eats a diseased buffalo, the disease dies inside the crocodile. When a vulture eats the same buffalo, the disease often survives the digestive tract and is redeposited elsewhere in the environment. Vultures matter. They are the scavengers of the terrestrial system, but in the water, the crocodile is doing something no other animal in the ecosystem is equipped to do. A single adult Nile crocodile processes an estimated 200 to 500 kilograms of carrion and prey biomass per year, depending on the size of the individual and the productivity of its river. Scale that across a healthy population, and healthy populations, historically, meant 1 to 2 adult crocodiles per kilometer of major African river, and you are looking at tens of thousands of tons of biomass being pulled out of the water column, sterilized, and either metabolized or redeposited as fertilizer every single year along every major crocodilian inhabited river system on the planet. No mammalian scavenger comes close. A pack of hyenas working the same stretch of river might process a fraction of that, and the hyenas cannot enter the water to retrieve a carcass that has already sunk. Now consider what happens when you remove that function. In the 1970s and 80s, when crocodile populations across parts of southern and eastern Africa were at their lowest point from decades of hide hunting, freshwater ecologists began noticing something odd about the rivers where the crocodiles had been removed. Fish kills were more frequent. Waterborne disease outbreaks were more severe. The banks accumulated bones. Vulture populations spiked briefly and then crashed as their food sources shifted, and lead poisoning from bullet fragments began to take a toll. The rivers, in the language of the ecologists studying them, had lost their sanitation. They were still rivers. They were still moving water, but they had lost the animal that kept them clean. There is a second function tangled into this one, and it is less obvious but arguably more important: nutrient cycling. When a crocodile eats a carcass, the nitrogen and phosphorus and trace minerals in that carcass do not disappear. They pass through the crocodile's body and are redeposited in the water, on the banks, and, critically, at the nesting sites where female crocodiles spend weeks or months guarding their eggs. Nile crocodile nesting mounds have been studied using stable isotope analysis, a technique that lets ecologists track where the nitrogen in a plant or a soil sample originally came from. The results are consistent across multiple river systems. The vegetation growing on and around active crocodile nesting sites shows nitrogen signatures traceable back to fish and mammal prey. In other words, the crocodile is not just a predator and a sanitation system. It is also a mobile fertilizer distribution network, moving nutrients from the water onto the land and concentrating them at specific points along the riverbank, where they support the riparian vegetation that stabilizes the bank against erosion. This is a service that is almost impossible to price, and yet it has been priced. A 2015 study attempting to estimate the ecosystem service value of Nile crocodile populations in a single protected area in Zimbabwe put the combined value of their carcass removal, nutrient cycling, and fisheries regulation services at somewhere between $4 and $7 million United States dollars per year for that one park alone. That number is almost certainly conservative, because it does not include the harder-to-quantify value of disease suppression, the outbreaks that did not happen because the pathogens were destroyed inside a crocodile's stomach before they could spread. And here is a detail that ought to be more famous than it is. The crocodile appears to be, in some meaningful sense, immune to the diseases it consumes. Researchers studying crocodilian immune function have documented that captive crocodiles fed deliberately with pathogen-loaded material, as part of controlled veterinary studies, show essentially no infection response. The pathogens are destroyed in the gut, the animal metabolizes the meal, and moves on. Scientists have been trying, for the better part of 3 decades, to figure out exactly how the crocodilian immune system does this, because whatever it is doing it more effectively than the immune systems of most mammals, including our own. We are not going to fully unpack that puzzle in this section. It is the subject of research that is still ongoing, and we will return to what it might mean for human medicine shortly. If you are finding any of this interesting, by the way, subscribe. This channel exists to make the case for the animals that most people would rather not think about, and the crocodile is the strongest case we have. The logic seemed obvious. It seemed so obvious that entire river communities across Africa, South Asia, and northern Australia acted on it for most of the 20th century, and government fisheries departments in several countries actively encouraged them to do so. Crocodiles eat fish. Fishermen want fish. Therefore, fewer crocodiles equals more fish. It is one of the cleanest examples of intuitive ecological reasoning being completely, catastrophically wrong that the 20th century produced. Start with the mechanism, because it is the mechanism that everyone missed. When a crocodile hunts fish, it does not hunt them randomly, and it does not hunt them proportionally. A large adult Nile crocodile has a strong dietary preference for slow-moving, bottom-dwelling predatory fish, specifically catfish, and specifically the largest catfish in the river. In some studied populations, catfish account for more than 70% of the fish biomass consumed by adult crocodiles. This is not because catfish taste better, it is because catfish are large, energetically profitable, and easier for an ambush predator to catch than fast-moving pelagic species. A 3-meter crocodile hunting in a river is going to spend its energy on the highest return prey available, and in most African and Asian river systems, that means large predatory catfish. Now consider what catfish eat. Catfish are themselves aggressive predators. They eat almost everything smaller than them: tilapia, cichlids, carp, the eggs and juveniles of dozens of commercially important species. In a river system with a healthy crocodile population, the catfish population is held in check. The catfish that exist are the ones fast enough or lucky enough to avoid the crocodiles, and their overall numbers are suppressed to the point where the smaller food fish, the tilapia and cichlids that villagers actually eat and sell, can reproduce faster than the catfish can eat them. Remove the crocodile, and the catfish population explodes. Within a few years, the catfish are eating everything. The tilapia collapse, the cichlids collapse, the commercial fisheries collapse. This is not a hypothetical sequence. It has been documented, in slightly different forms, in multiple river and lake systems across 3 continents. The most cited case is Lake Turkana in northern Kenya, where crocodile populations were heavily reduced through the middle of the 20th century, and where fisheries yields for tilapia dropped by an estimated 40 to 60% in the following decades, with catfish becoming the dominant biomass in the lake. Similar patterns have been reported from portions of the Zambezi system, from Ugandan lake fisheries, and from river systems in northern Australia, where saltwater crocodile removal preceded measurable shifts in fish community composition. The villagers who killed the crocodiles to save their fish ended up losing their fish. Not because the crocodiles came back and ate them, because the crocodiles were gone, and this is the pattern that repeats, in increasingly disturbing detail, when you look at the most thoroughly documented crocodilian collapse of the modern era, the gharial. If you have never seen one, look it up when this section ends. The gharial is a crocodilian, but it does not look like the animal you have been picturing for the last 2 chapters. Its snout is long, thin, and needle-like, evolved over tens of millions of years to swing sideways through the water and snap up fish with almost no drag. Adult males develop a bulbous growth on the tip of the snout, called a ghara, from the Hindi word for the round clay pot it resembles. Gharials are almost exclusively piscivorous. They do not, in normal circumstances, attack large mammals. They do not, in normal circumstances, attack humans. They are the specialists of the crocodilian world, evolved for one job in one habitat, and they do that job better than any other freshwater predator on the Indian subcontinent. In the 1940s, the gharial population across the Ganges, Indus, Brahmaputra, Mahanadi, and Chambal river systems was estimated at somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 adult animals. By the mid-1970s, that number had crashed to fewer than 200. By 2006, when a comprehensive survey was finally conducted across the remaining habitat, researchers could locate fewer than 250 breeding adults across the entire species range. That is a decline of somewhere between 96 and 98% in roughly 2 human generations. The gharial today is classified as critically endangered, and the surviving population is concentrated almost entirely in a single protected stretch of the Chambal River in central India. The causes were the same as everywhere else: hide hunting, habitat loss, entanglement in fishing nets, sand mining that destroyed nesting beaches, and dam construction that fragmented breeding populations. But the consequences of the collapse were specific to the gharial's specialized role. In the river stretches where the gharial had been the dominant piscivore, the fish community shifted. The mugger crocodile, a smaller generalist crocodilian that had historically been outcompeted by the gharial in deep water habitats, expanded into the vacated niche. But the mugger is a generalist. It does not target the same fish. It does not concentrate its hunting in the deep pools where the gharial hunted, and in some river stretches, the shift in predator community was followed by measurable declines in the specific fish species, masir, katla, and rohu among them, that both the gharial and the local fishing communities had depended on. The gharial collapse is the clearest natural experiment we have. Take a specialist predator out of a river system where it has operated for millions of years. Watch the system reorganize around its absence. Measure what breaks. In the Chambal and its tributaries, what broke was a fishery that had been productive for as long as humans had been recording productivity, and a river ecology that is still, decades later, trying to find a new equilibrium. And this is where the crocodilian story stops being about rivers and starts being about medicine. Because for years, researchers have been asking a question that seems almost too obvious to state. Crocodiles fight, constantly. They fight over territory, over mates, over kills. Large adults regularly lose limbs, entire legs, portions of tails, chunks of jaw, in these fights. They then return to some of the most bacterially loaded water on Earth, dragging open wounds through mud that contains everything from E. coli to salmonella to the various strains of Vibrio that cause serious human infection. And they do not, in the vast majority of cases, get septic. They do not die of infection. Their wounds heal. They go back to fighting. Why? Starting in the 1990s and accelerating through the 2000s, research teams, primarily in Australia, Thailand, and the United States, began systematically studying crocodilian blood serum to try to answer that question. What they found was not one antimicrobial compound. It was dozens. Crocodilian blood is loaded with small antimicrobial peptides, some of which are broadly similar to compounds found in the immune systems of other reptiles and birds, and some of which appear to be unique to the crocodilian lineage. A group of these peptides isolated from the Siamese crocodile has been given the name leucrosin. Another compound, sometimes referred to in the literature as crococin, has been isolated from saltwater crocodile serum. In laboratory testing, these peptides have shown activity against Staphylococcus aureus, including the methicillin-resistant strain, MISA, which kills tens of thousands of people worldwide every year. They have shown activity against E. coli, against Pseudomonas aeruginosa, one of the most stubborn pathogens in hospital-acquired infections, against some strains of fungal pathogens, and in early in vitro studies, against certain enveloped viruses, including HIV. These are laboratory results. They are not clinical treatments. Nobody is suggesting that a crocodile blood extract is going to appear in your pharmacy next year. The gap between demonstrating antimicrobial activity in a petri dish and delivering a safe, effective drug to human patients is enormous, and most compounds that show promise at the petri dish stage never make it through. The function is engineering. Literal, physical, dirt-moving engineering. For most of the 20th century, freshwater ecologists thought of the crocodile as a passive occupant of its environment, an animal that used the river but did not shape it. That assumption began to fall apart in the 1990s, when field researchers working in northern Australia's tropical river systems started paying closer attention to what saltwater and freshwater crocodiles were physically doing during the long dry season. What they documented was not passive at all, it was construction. When surface water begins to disappear at the end of the wet season, as tropical rivers shrink from continuous flows down to disconnected pools and eventually to isolated waterholes, crocodiles do not simply retreat and wait. They dig. Using their forelimbs, their snouts, and the sweep of their tails, they excavate the deepest available section of a shrinking pool into a proper refuge, often widening and deepening it by a meter or more over the course of a season. They defend these excavated pools aggressively. They return to them year after year, and the pools they build are, in many cases, the deepest and most persistent standing water in the entire river system by the time the dry season peaks. This matters because those pools are not private. They cannot be. The crocodile builds them for itself, but the moment they exist, every other animal in the ecosystem needs them too. Fish shelter in them, turtles overwinter in them, frogs breed at their edges, waterbirds hunt the fish that concentrate in them, kangaroos and wallabies and feral pigs come to drink from them. In some studied river stretches in the Northern Territory, crocodile-maintained dry-season pools have been documented supporting more than 60 vertebrate species, many of which would not survive the dry season at all if the pool were not there. The crocodile is not sharing. It is still, on any given afternoon, willing to kill anything that comes to the water's edge. But its refusal to let the pool disappear, its physical labor in keeping it deep, is what allows the surrounding ecosystem to make it through to the next rain. Without the crocodile, the pool silts up, shallows out, and evaporates weeks or months earlier than it otherwise would. And every animal that depended on it either moves, dies, or does not reproduce that year. This is the function that is becoming impossible to ignore, because the rivers themselves are changing. Across the tropics and subtropics, the exact belt of the planet where crocodilians have persisted for the last 200 million years, dry seasons are getting longer, hotter, and drier. The Zambezi Basin has recorded some of the lowest dry season flow rates in its measured history over the past decade. The Mekong, dammed heavily upstream and stressed by shifting monsoon patterns, has experienced dry season water levels low enough to expose riverbed sediment that has not seen air in living memory. Northern Australia is projected to see dry season flows decline further through the middle of this century. The Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Okavango, the Nile, every major crocodilian river on Earth is under some combination of climate pressure, upstream extraction, and dam-driven flow disruption. And the animal that engineers the last standing water in exactly those systems is, in most of them, at a fraction of its historical population. Consider what this means practically. In a river that has been degraded by drought and diversion, the deep dry season pools are not a luxury. They are the entire basis on which the biological community survives the 6 or 7 months between rains. When crocodile populations are healthy, those pools are maintained by an animal that has been doing this job for tens of millions of years and has evolved specifically to be good at it. When crocodile populations have been reduced, by hunting, by habitat destruction, by conflict with fishing communities, by the slow erosion of tolerance that follows every attack on a person, the pools shallow out, the refugia collapse, and the drought that the river might have absorbed becomes the drought that the river does not recover from. This is not a distant scenario. In portions of northern Australia, where crocodile populations have recovered strongly since legal protection in the 1970s, dry season pool systems have been measurably more stable, deeper, and more species-rich than in ecologically similar rivers elsewhere. In the Chambal, where gharial numbers are a fraction of what they once were, the deep pools that historically held fish and turtles through the hot months are increasingly shallow and increasingly ephemeral. The correlation is not proof of causation. Rivers are complicated, and many pressures overlap, but the pattern is consistent enough that freshwater ecologists working on drought resilience are now, increasingly, treating crocodilian population health as a proxy for the drought resilience of the whole river system. Which means the century of hunting we started with, the 5 to 7 million skins pulled out of the world's rivers between the 1940s and the 1970s, did not just kill an ancient predator, it removed a piece of climate adaptation infrastructure from the exact ecosystems that are now facing the sharpest climate stress on the planet. We did not know that at the time. Nobody in a 1950 tannery was thinking about dry season pool depth in the year 2026. But that is what the transaction was. And now, in the rivers that survived it, the crocodile is doing what the crocodile has always done. It is lying in the deepest available water, unblinking, waiting. 200 million years of the same posture, the same eye above the waterline that watched the sky turn black at the end of the Cretaceous, is now watching the tropical wet season arrive later, each year, and end sooner. The animal has not changed. The world around it has. Look back at the opening image. The eye above the water, the body plan that has not needed editing since before flowering plants were common, the bite that outmatches every mammalian predator on Earth. That animal is not good. It is not our friend. It does not care whether we live or die, and in the specific stretches of river where subsistence communities cannot avoid the water, it will continue to kill roughly 1,000 to 1,500 people every year, indifferently, because that is what it has always done, and there is no reason for it to stop. That is not the argument. The argument is that the world we live in, the freshwater world, the world with functioning rivers and drinkable water, and productive fisheries and diseases that stay in carcasses instead of migrating into wells, is a world that was assembled over tens of millions of years with the crocodile inside it. The rivers were shaped around the animal. The fish populations were structured around it. The carcass disposal, the nutrient cycling, the dry season refugia, the disease suppression, all of it evolved with a large ambush predator in place, doing its job, whether anyone thanked it or not. Take the predator out, and the system does not simply lose a threat, it loses a component. And the component turns out to have been holding several other things up at the same time. The world is more complicated than good animals and bad animals. Some of the things keeping us alive are things we would kill on sight, and would feel justified in killing, and would be able to describe with real and legitimate anger while we were doing it. The crocodile is not asking to be liked. It is not asking to be respected. It is only, still, doing the thing it has been doing since before we existed as a species, and the rivers appear to notice the difference, even when we do not. We still do not know everything about this animal. We do not fully understand its immune system. We do not fully understand how a body plan can go unchanged for tens of millions of years, while everything around it churns through extinction after extinction. We do not know exactly how many peptides in its blood might, one day, save a life in a hospital that has run out of working antibiotics. We do not know how many of the dry season pools we depend on, in the rivers we depend on, exist only because a crocodile decided to dig them. What we do know is that we have spent the last 100 years finding out what happens when the animal is not there, and the answer, everywhere the experiment has been run, has been worse than we expected. The rivers are drying. The animal that engineered them for drought is diminished. And the century we spent trying to eliminate it may turn out to have been the most expensive mistake in the history of freshwater management, a bill that the next generation of people living along those rivers is going to be the first to actually pay. We started this by saying the crocodile watched the dinosaurs die. The question now is whether it is going to watch us make the same mistake they did.